Welcome to this episode of Pegwarmers. Today I'm interviewing Paul Sorton, who is a toy sculptor for many years. Special thanks to my friends Rose and Tony from RetroCon for setting up this interview. I did want to give one brief disclaimer. We had an equipment malfunction, and the audio is not quite as nice on this episode as it usually is, but I still think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Thanks for watching. All right. Welcome to Pegwarmers. I'm Kevin.
My name's Paul.
And we're here to talk about toys. Today we're lucky to have Paul Sorton with us, who is a toy sculptor. I'm going to jump right into teasing it a little bit, but Paul sculpted 8 GI Joe figures from the 90s that I grew up with, and a lot of people that watch this show grew up with. And that's one of the most exciting things about having Paul on here. But he's sculpted a lot of things besides those GI Joes as well.
Well, I was doing it for 15 years in 3 different shops, so I had a lot of opportunities to do a lot of characters. Best job I've ever had. You can't get a better job than one that pays you to do something that you'd be doing on your own. It's the cherry on top of the sundae of work.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, before you were a sculptor, like, how did you develop that skill? Did you study this in school?
No, actually, I went to school for TV production and radio production. But I always was sculpting and drawing. I started drawing and sculpting when I was a little kid. Built all the old Aurora monster kits and airplanes and you name it. I was very into model kits. And when I was in my late teens, I got real annoyed with the quality of the toy dinosaurs that were available. There was the Marx dinosaurs that were, of course, beyond criticism. But after them, there really wasn't anything that great. Everything was either very derivative or very inaccurate or just bad. And I was complaining about it, and my mother happened to be there, and she said, well, why don't you make your own? And so I started sculpting little dinosaurs for myself, and this was about the time that polymer clay came out.
Okay.
For about 15 years, I was the unofficial spokesperson for polymer clay. Every show I went to, I was also known as the guy who sculpts dinosaurs and never sells them. I'd go to convention art shows and I'd have my dinosaurs set up, and then, oh, you gonna sell anything this time? Of course not. Why would I break my string? But anyway, my sister came down here. I'm originally from New England, okay. And my sister came down here to go to vet school. And her anatomy instructor was Dr. Peter Dodson, who's a fairly well-known paleontologist. And when she found that out, she started selling me to him. The sale took roughly 3 months because I was just coming off of basic training in the Air Force. Fortunately, if you want to put it that way, my right knee liked basic training even less than I did and let me know about it 13 days into training. So they sent me home, and immediately I got a call from my sister saying, you want to come down and meet Dr. Dodson? Because he really wants to meet you. And so I came down here and was back and forth between here and New England for a couple of years. And then I was down here trying to make another go at being down here permanently. And I'd been down here about 3 weeks at that point, and I saw an ad in the Inquirer for a model maker. And my sister said, hey, go for it. You can't, the worst thing that can happen is they say no. Saw the ad on a Sunday, called them on Monday, interviewed on Tuesday, started on Wednesday.
Wow, that's rapid.
I was amazed, and I was there for 13 years. I was there until the company had to shut down because there was all the clients had gone overseas.
Okay.
And then I went to 2 other shops over the next 2.5 years that also were suffering the same problem, that all the clients were going overseas. So for 15 plus years, that was what I did. I sculpted in a model shop, which was great because I'd go into work and the work would be right there, which is much better than freelancing, where freelancers spend 2/3 of their time chasing jobs. And I admit it, I'm basically lazy. I don't want to have to chase the jobs. I just want to go into a nice, well-equipped shop and sit down and do the work. And for 15 years, that's exactly what I got to do. And it was great.
So what kind of a process is that? So that you said the work would be there. So what did they give you to guide you?
The salespeople would be dealing with the clients, and they would quote the job, how long they thought it was going to take and how expensive they thought it was going to be. And that would all be worked out without my involvement, thank God. So when the job was worked out, they would provide us with, they'd figure out who would be best to handle a specific job. And then they would provide us with whatever reference material and instructions the client had. And we had, at our high point, we had about 40 people in the shop.
Wow.
About half of them were considered to be pure model makers. They were doing machining work and more mechanical fabrication, whereas I was a sculptor. At the high point, there were 5 of us, and we were doing more sculptural work, more, I guess organic would be a good word for it. And we also had a casting shop that had 3 or 4 people working who were just making, setting pieces up for mold making and running castings. And we also had a paint shop to do finished looks like models,
okay.
So that the clients could see what it was theoretically going to look like when it was all finished. And so they'd hand us the job, and they'd say, all right, you've got 45 hours to finish this, and they want it by by the 15th.
Okay.
And so we just sit down and we crank it out. We had a variety of materials that we worked with: styrene and ABS plastic, high density foam. For the sculptors, though, most of what we did was in wax.
Okay.
I brought a sample of the wax. This is a piece that we didn't really. This was a piece that I was working on during a slow period.
Okay.
They didn't want us just sitting around twiddling our thumbs during slow periods, and we weren't supposed to work on our own projects. So, at least at RJ Studios, Ralph would had a couple of in-house projects that he would have us work on. And for some reason, I always ended up doing elves and Christmas stuff.
Okay.
I brought this mostly. It shows exactly how versatile the wax is. The wax, I had never worked on it until I walked into RJ Studios, and within an hour I was in love with it.
Okay.
Because it's just the greatest material to work with in the world if you're doing small detailed pieces, because you can carve it really, really tight detail. I mean,
now would you start with a block, or would you build up to something?
Well, it depended on the product. For a GI Joes, which is the crux here after all,
mm-hmm.
they would send us, along with the drawings, they would send us what was known as a buck, which was basically the minimum mass requirements for the figure plus all the joints.
It's kind of like a stick figure with the articulation.
Yeah, an articulated stick figure, an articulated skeletal, kind of like an artist's model figure.
Okay.
And we would initially build them up by hand. Our primary tool for building up with wax and working the wax was essentially a soldering gun plugged into a dimmer switch, so that we could control the heat. And we just melt the wax and build it up originally. Later on, we made up some molds, and we would put the buck inside the mold, and then just pour the wax, fill it with the wax, so that we would have a big chunk, the buck with big chunky wax all over it, and then we would melt it down with the tool to get it down to approximately the proportions we wanted, and then we would get our sculpting tools out and start carving it down and cleaning it up.
That's really cool.
It was fun. GI Joes were like a vacation for me because they were a priority job. So whenever I got a GI Joe, I wouldn't be interrupted with other jobs. And that was great because I hate being interrupted in the middle. If I'm really cranking away at something and, really into it, the last thing I want to do is change horses in midstream. I just don't want to be, really wound in and in the groove, and then, oh, by the way, you've got to stop and change speeds and work on this for a little while. But GI Joes I didn't have to deal with that. The first one I did, they would take me about 2 weeks to do.
Okay.
And by the time I did the last one, I had that down to 8 days, because I found out one of the nice things about the wax is that when you get good with it, you can go real fast.
Okay.
And my father was convinced I had 2 speeds in everything. slow and stop. It amused him very much when I told him, Dad, I'm the speed sculptor. When something needs to be done in a hurry, they hand it to me. And he just shook his head. He couldn't believe it.
Wow. So what were some of the clients besides obviously Hasbro?
Hasbro. We did a lot of stuff for Tyco. In fact, at the time that I started, they were our big toy client. We did stuff for the Franklin and Danbury Mints, Mattel. We did some stuff relating to Barbies. We did one job for Kenner for the Star Wars line. We worked on the assault vehicle from Attack of the Clones.
Oh, okay.
I got to clean up some castings. My claim to Star Wars fame. A lot of the toy companies we worked for, I honestly never knew their names, and as far as I know, a lot of them that didn't stick around very long.
Okay.
We had, during the '90s, there were a lot of startup toy companies that they'd come out real big with like gangbusters, and then they'd be in a store for like 2.5 years, and then you'd never hear a word from them again. Like the Street Sharks.
Right, everybody was trying to catch the Ninja Turtle and Power Ranger
exactly.
craze.
We did a lot of Ninja Turtle kind of knockoffs. We worked on the Street Sharks, and there was some super deformed dinosaur characters that we did that inspired one of the more frustrating jobs that came through the shop. As I said, I honestly didn't know, because I wasn't encouraged to have a direct contact with the clients.
Right.
For some reason, the sales guys were mildly convinced that I didn't play well with others, which, I don't know, it might have had some validity to it. Well, I never did bite anybody, but it was fun though. I loved it.
One of the things that we had talked about previously was Dino-Riders.
Yeah.
Your company worked with Tyco, and you are a dinosaur person.
Oh, they used to try to go for, they would bid on dinosaur related jobs, and they would use the fact that I had a bit of a reputation in paleo art circles at that time. This guy has pieces in various museums and in various exhibitions, and he specializes in dinosaurs. And I think it actually accomplished anything maybe half a dozen times.
Okay.
It did get me. We did do some stuff for Dino-Riders. Actually, Dino-Riders was actually a fairly successful line, and I only got to do one piece for it when I was freelancing. Before I started in with, at RJ Studios, I was trying to freelance, and my first professional job was this guy, which you have your copy, I have mine, with a different paint job. It was also the first time that I got down-checked for doing something too well. My original sculpt, I did not understand entirely about molding requirements and draft, so I just did this incredibly detailed little crocodile head, and I brought it. I was up in Boston at the time, living and working, and I drove down for a weekend. Got down here on a Friday morning. My sister was still going to school down here, so at least I didn't have to pay for a hotel room. And I presented this little head, and they picked it up, and they looked at it, and they studied it, and they looked at me, and they said, "You're going to have to do it again." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "This is too detailed. We will never be able to pull this out of a mold. And you've got undercuts all over it. We'll never be able to get this out of a mold. So I need to do it less good," essentially. I think part of the reason I didn't get another job with them was because they showed me their original prototypes, and they were claiming that they were museum quality pieces, and I just, not having much of an editor at that point, I looked at them and I said, "I don't want to go to the museum that is exhibiting stuff like this." They were less than enthused by my reaction to their pieces, which they were very proud of.
And it's kind of funny because then eventually those dinosaurs were sold at the Smithsonian.
Yeah, the better ones were. They did get better over time. The last one that I really looked at closely, the Kentrosaurus, was surprisingly good.
Okay.
But the Triceratops and the Deinonychus, I shouldn't call it a Velociraptor because it's not. I don't care what Jurassic Park tells us. The first ones were pretty crude. But the last ones in the series were very good, and And I did get to work on Jurassic Park toys. This set was my triumph for Jurassic Park. We did about a half a dozen very small dinosaurs for them. I got real good at very small details. I would have liked to have done some of the bigger ones, but unfortunately the real good big ones didn't come along until after I was out of the field.
So I know with GI Joes you sculpted 2 up. They were double the size.
Yes.
Was that the same case for those dinosaurs?
Well, it depended. These guys, this is a sample casting that we did in the shop of my original sculpt for the little T-Rex. It shows, it shows how the joints work because he's designed so that he can rock on his legs. You can rock him back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the point of that was, but it made the sculpting a little more fun. Those were done 1-to-1.
Okay.
The little Dino-Rider guy was done 1-to-1.
Wow.
Yeah. The GI Joes, though, were 2 up. This Jurassic Park toy was done for a die-cast piece. So it's actually 4 up.
Okay.
And the hand fell off. I brought it. Part of the reason I brought it along was because it shows very, very much the importance of what we call draft. When things are molded, especially when they're using hard steel molds, they can't have anything that tucks under. It's called an undercut.
Okay.
And this piece, you can therefore see where I had to fill in between the legs and the arms to avoid, or on the claws, it sort of drifts over so that there won't be anything that'll hang up inside the mold. Because obviously having something hang up in the mold is very bad for production. But, which was something I had to learn.
Yeah, it's always interesting if you look, especially at like the cheap dinosaurs and army men and stuff, how obvious the mold lines are, but it's interesting to see how they like zigzag from leg to leg on the belly of a dinosaur.
Yeah, that was all because of mold requirements. Most of the toy manufacturers want to produce things as quickly and as cheaply as possible. So they're not as worried about the integrity of the sculpt as they are just the ability to knock them out fast. So, and that was a source of frustration for me for quite a while, because I'd want to do this real tight sculpt and they'd say, no, you can't do that because they'll never get it out of the mold.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, that as an artist you want to get it to be as realistic and as accurate as possible.
Yeah.
But there's just limitations to making
there were
profit.
Yeah, periodically I had to be reminded they're doing this to make money, not to not to do art. And okay, fine, whatever. But so we had to be within, and also you had to be aware of the fact that if you were working on a figure that was like 37th in a series, that your piece had to match the artistic style of the previous 36. GI Joes are a great example of that. At the time I was working on them, they had a very specific style that they were working with. It kind of trying to match the cartoon. And also you had to match the previous pieces. So they all have kind of a bulky look to them and very prominent musculature. And we had to match and a very specific style to the folds of the fabric of the clothing. And they had to match that. And it was a learning process, which is why the first 3 I did, I only had to do the roughing up, and then Charlie would do the finishing work. And finally, when it got to good old Toxo-Viper, they said, okay, we're going to let you handle this one completely.
So that was the first one you did by yourself?
That was the first one I did by myself, and it was also the first one that didn't require a second round of work, which surprised everybody.
That's pretty amazing.
It was usually we'd do them, and we'd send them out, or we'd send out pictures of them later on. But when I first started, we would actually either we would send them out to Hasbro, or they would send their rep down to look them over.
Okay.
I never got to meet any of these people because, as I said, I don't play well with others. But they would look them over and they would give us a list of corrections, and then we would spend 3 or 4 more days just fulfilling their requirements. But good old both of the Toxos, they went through on the first tries, and I was amazed that the Toxo-Viper, the Toxo-Zombie went through on the first try, because the first challenge with him was that I had to duplicate what I had done on the Toxo-Viper a couple of years before, and we didn't have a finished copy of the Toxo-Viper except one of the one of the finished toys, that I had bought. I bought most of the ones that I worked on.
So you had to basically sculpt the whole second one and then beat it up.
I had to resculpt the original figure and then beat the crap out of it. And every day, sometimes twice a day, Tony, the head sales guy, would come in, and later vice president would come in and look at it and say, "Yeah, that's great, do more." And I was like, "Tony, they're never going to accept this." I did everything I could think of to that poor guy to beat him up, except amputation, and he is actually missing a finger.
Yeah, you can see if you look on the underside.
He's missing a finger. He's got burns and bullet wounds and knife wounds and I swear everything. The only thing they wouldn't let me do was carry on the drawing on his left leg. There was a little bit of fabric hanging below the knee joint, which I originally sculpted. And Tony looked at that and said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "You can't have anything past, beyond the joint," which was a minor frustration, but all things considered, a very minor one, because otherwise, we sent it out, and I spent the next day and a half saying, "Okay, he'll be back anytime." Tony walked in the third day and he said, "They love it. They don't want to change a thing." I was flabbergasted. I was certain that they were going to make me do changes.
Did they have you take that flap off, or did they just do it?
It never got that far. Back. Tony looked at it and said, "No, you can't do that." So I took it off.
So Hasbro never even saw that.
No, they never saw that.
Gotcha.
They would have, that would have been a red flag in hindsight, though. They would have said, "No, you can't have that." But on the other hand, all you would have had to do to get rid of that was just with a penknife, and it would have gone, because it was just wax. That's the nice thing about wax. It was easy to make corrections. It's hard enough to hold details, but it's also soft enough that you can make corrections really quick and really easy. It's great. You can polish it up to a high shine or make it as rough as you want. It's just, and you can get really subtle details. I wish the camera could catch how subtle the details on this guy.
We'll definitely have to get
if you look at his eyes, you can see that his eyes, the irises, are just barely visible there. I did that as fine as I could, just so that it would be, if we ever took those to a finished piece, there'd be a guide there for painting the eyes. He was a nice way to kill some time during the slow period. Slow periods were not fun, because we'd be sitting around trying to think of things. We weren't really supposed to work on personal projects, but they didn't want us to just be sitting around either. So we went to a lot of, the boss, Ralph Ippoliti, would throw in-house jobs for things that he was hoping he might be able to take to a finished, find a client for. So I worked on circus figures and several different variations on elves, Christmas elves, leprechauns, and whatever they could think of to keep us busy when we weren't busy.
Gotcha. But, so who did you sculpt next? Do you kind of know an order after that?
I'm pretty sure that my next guy was the Ninja Slice. Who apparently Hasbro liked him so much that they recycled him about a half a dozen times at least.
He got a couple repaints, and then they started using his body with a new head to make another character.
Yeah, he's a nice illustration of the basic style that we had to work with, because most ninjas, their clothing isn't so tight that it's forming wrinkles on there, that it's making wrinkles and creases. Most ninjas don't have a barrel chest that I've ever seen. So he's a great example of the style that we were having to work into. And then I think I did the Headman. He gave me some troubles on the head. Human faces have never been my strong suit.
Okay.
And so Charlie Bozzo came in and did a final touch-up on the face, but everything else was mine. Again, he's, find somebody whose suit fits him like that. He was one of the sillier ones, and apparently he was. I later found out he was kind of controversial because he was supposed to be a drug dealer, I think.
Yeah, so he was the main bad guy from a sub-team called Drug Elimination Force, and it was Hasbro really took the war on drugs literally in this era, and so he was the leader of a bad guy faction. And in the cartoon, he actually hooked one of the Joes on drugs, and it's one of the goofier episodes. But he's notorious for being one of the few characters to die on the cartoon because it was usually people just parachuted away from exploding jets and retreated, but he basically got like. Yeah, doused in his own stash and overdosed, basically.
Wow, that is
it's very
for a cartoon.
Very like overtly, to explain. Like kids don't, they didn't really go into a lot of detail, but he gets buried under.
Wow,
it's pretty crazy.
Like I said, I'd heard that there was some controversy about him, but as I said, I never actually watched the show. I didn't think much of the animation or art style.
Now, did they ask for any corrections on him?
I think there were some minor things. I think we had to rework his hat a little bit.
Okay.
Again, for draft issues. By the time I got to him, I had the style down pretty well. So there weren't any corrections that came through were usually very minor things like change the way some creases are going or the way the coat closes or something like that. And
you didn't sculpt their accessories, correct?
No, the accessories were done by, I guess they had another shop that specialized in that. I didn't even get to do the gun for the bat.
Oh, really?
I was given a diameter for his for the wrist peg, and that was about as far as it went. But he was challenging because the drawing for him was showed him as being very slender. And I was determined to try and match that slender style as closely as I could. And Tony Rogers was convinced that, they're going to want you to bulk that guy up. And I said, well, if they want me to work him some more, I work him some more. It's not a big deal. And by then, things were getting a little weird with Hasbro. And he was, from what I understand, he was trying real hard to make things go as smoothly as possible with them.
Okay.
But again, he was one that I don't remember if there were any revisions required on him. As I'm thinking about it, there may not have been. He may have gotten through on the first try as well because I don't remember Tony ever coming in with him again to say you got to make changes. I'm very pleased by the fact that I was right, that in fact they were happy to have him.
They liked him being skinny.
They liked him being skinny. I took him as close to the buck as I could, and it worked out.
Now, did you sculpt his removable hand?
I did sculpt his hand.
I assumed because it pretty much matches the other one, but the weapon hand.
And that was actually kind of fun figuring out how to make that work. That was the first time I'd done one that had a removable feature.
Okay.
And he was, I enjoyed working on him.
He's definitely a popular one. People love.
So people tell me.
Love the bats.
People. But I think the next one I did after the bat was the eel. Again, he was kind of fun. I didn't do the swim fins or the shark.
Okay.
But I think he went through 2 rounds because there were some issues about some of the size of the piping on him.
All right.
I had made it a little. I think if I remember correctly, I made it a little too delicate, and they were worried that it wasn't going to be moldable or it wasn't going to translate into the mold. So I seem to remember I had to touch up the piping around his chest and collar a little bit because I had done it a little too fine.
Okay.
But that was the way it was. That was the way things were going by that point. I'd been doing them at that point for 3 or 4 years, so I had the routine. I looked forward to them because it was like a vacation. It's like, oh boy, nobody's going to bother me for the next 2 weeks. Of course, as I said, by the time I got down to the last one, it was 8 days.
Yeah.
And that was 5 day 8 hour days. was great. 40-hour work.
So the next one you did was Ice Cream Soldier?
Yes, yeah. I still, to this day, do not understand his name, but he was fun to sculpt.
It's definitely a very cool design. It's a very bizarre figure as far as being a good guy flamethrower with the name Ice Cream Soldier.
There were a lot of questions about him that no one ever answered adequately for me. But he was, with all the little, he was, basically, this guy was a challenge from the get-go because he's got so much going on. And there's so much potential for undercuts.
Okay.
I seem to remember that he did come back because I cut it as close as I could, but there were still a couple of spots that were, had some undercuts. The 3 grenades on his chest there. Anytime you were dealing with something that was mounted on the torso, you were looking at the potential for undercuts.
Yeah, they always have to sculpt them like a half a grenade.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't get out.
Like it's embedded in their chest.
Yeah.
And I seem to remember his head was, I spent a good amount of time on his head because that helmet has a lot going on and trying to make it work.
Yeah, it's got
still be moldable.
Little crevices on the back. It's got some stuff on the mouthpiece.
And it sort of simulates an undercut. If you look at it from the side, it looks like it slopes down.
Okay.
But in fact, that's deceptive because while it does slope down, it also slopes in enough to make it, to give it the 2 degrees clearance that we had to have.
Okay.
Nothing could be 90 degrees. It had to, the best you could do was 87 degrees. If it was anything more than 88 degrees, it was considered an undercut.
Mm-hmm.
And, you had to have the draft because God forbid that they had to, they would use a mold that had more than 2 pieces. But
it's interesting that his one arm has like a bulkier piece to it than the other, and I assume that was like in the drawing.
Yes, that was in the drawing. I commented on that myself when I saw that. It's like, why are the arms asymmetrical? And I said, because that's the way they drew them.
Yeah.
That was a lot of the times that was as much explanation as I got because that's what it shows on the drawing.
Right.
I'm not responsible for this any more than you are. In fact, I'm less responsible.
So the drawings you would get would show the figure from the front, back, and side?
Yes, and it would be to the size that the figure was supposed to be. So the drawings would be 2 up.
Okay, or 2 up.
And I thought I had some copies to bring along, but because I was pretty diligent about saving copies of drawings for a long time, but either hid them better than I thought or they got thrown out during one of my wife's periodic purges.
Okay. The final Joe that you worked on was just the upper half of Beachhead version 2.
Yeah, they said, his legs had been done previously, and again, he was one that because there's so many little potential undercuts on him, he's the only one I actually got to do, other than the Toxo-Zombie and Headman, that had something resembling an exposed face. And even then, it's supposedly covered with netting. Yeah,
it's a thing about that character and the card art that has kind of been a question. It comes up all the time. What is going on with that? He's got a helmet and a mesh mask.
It was tough to sculpt because figuring out how am I supposed to simulate. He supposedly got this netting over his face, the reason for which to this day I don't understand. And it was kind of challenging to figure out a way to make, to simulate that appearance. Because if you're really wearing a mask, a cloth mask, of course, it doesn't follow the contours of your face. From your nose to your chin, you get a flat surface. And so I spent a couple of days and I did ask for opinions.
Okay.
On the best way to manage that. And ultimately we just decided to just sculpt it kind of roughly, don't go into a lot of detail, and then just etch the pattern of the netting into the face. And it worked, they liked it. So that was the last one that we ever got, because after that they decided to take the line in a different direction. And after that, Hasbro also decided to go to other vendors.
Yeah.
I think
there's only a few more years of the line left,
Yeah.
and they were starting to heavily do a lot of repaints and reuses of molds, and just a few new sculpted characters that like that last year.
Yeah, I seem to recall hearing that they took stuff out to Gentle Giant Studios after that. Gentle Giant, I think, is about the only shop that's still doing that kind of work, or at least for a very long time it was in this country. As I said, a huge amount of the work just went overseas, where it was with the development of the internet and virtual meetings and stuff. It was no longer so expensive to go and inspect the work. You know, the quality of the video that was available eventually. You know, they could look at it virtually and say, okay, we can see how it looks. Because for a long time, it was a big day when the client reps would come in to look at the stuff. And we would all be, especially me, I would be told to be on your best behavior, you know, be quiet. You know. Not that we ever got to meet them. I think I met maybe 2 client reps in 13 years.
Okay.
But I didn't mind that. It was, you know, it was the job. It was, I was happy to have it. You know, coming down here got me the best job I ever had in my life, and it also got me a wife. You know, so it was it was a good time.
So you had told me a couple stories about likeness. You had talked to me about an Elvis project you had worked on.
Yeah. We got hired by the Danbury Mint to do an Elvis figure. It was supposed to be an articulated figure that was going to dance and do the hip sway. And Charlie was starting to go a little sideways by then. And so when he sculpted Elvis, he actually sculpted himself. And I if I remember correctly, he resigned like 2 weeks after he finished it or something like that. The time frame was really short. And so then I got to take a shot at him, and 3 of the other sculptors in the shop got to take a shot at him, and they even brought in an outside contractor to try and get Elvis's likeness. And with the exception, so we had 6 sculpts of Elvis in the shop, 5 of which I thought all were good likenesses. The differences between them were really minor. During that time, we all learned, or most of us learned, more about Elvis than we ever wanted to. He was an interesting personality. That's one thing I'll say about him. He's a classic illustration, not trying to offend any Elvis fans out there, but he was a great example of white trash with money. No matter how much money he got, he stayed a dumb hillbilly hick. And the end of it is that Priscilla Presley, who was in charge of Presley Enterprises at the time, rejected all of them. The first one, understandably. The others, to this day, I don't understand what was wrong with any of them, because they were all almost identical, really. There really wasn't a lot of difference between the 5 other sculpts, and she didn't like any of them.
I've heard of a handful of people that are really tough to get them to agree to a likeness.
Apparently William Shatner is like that.
Oh, really? Okay. I've heard Bill Murray is tough to work with.
Well, the other one that stands out in my memory was Shirley Temple.
Really?
When I first started, we were working with the Franklin Mint, who had Shirley Temple as the license. She was still alive at that point. And we had done a series of small figurines. They were about this high. She had a very subjective idea of what she looked like as a child.
All right.
She was convinced that she was very slender when she was a child. Anybody who's watched a Shirley Temple movie knows that while she wasn't chubby by any means, she was not slender. But we had to make her slender. And if she didn't like it, it came back. Okay. The last thing we did for them was a larger piece, which I got to work on. It was a head and shoulders sculpt, And what Franklin did was they sent their licensing person in that day to our shop, and they were keeping her entertained in the conference room. And I would do some work on the sculpt, and then they would take it to the conference room, and she would look it over and give notes, give corrections, and then bring it back out to me, and I'd work on it some more. And we spent the whole afternoon doing that. And by the end of the day, we had a likeness that everybody was happy with. And I kind of wish they had done that more often, because I found it to be a very effective way to do the job. The only thing that could have been more effective is if she had been brought into the shop proper
to watch you do
to watch me work. But I suspect that the sales guys were terrified of the prospect of an interaction between us, because I was still actually at that point it probably wouldn't have been too bad, because I was still fairly new to the job, and therefore very, very eager to please everybody. I didn't start to get a little egomaniacal until a few years down the line, but and I guess that's in a creative setting, that's a risk, because when you're dealing with creative people do have a tendency to have an ego. You're working on these things, you're creating, and you want people to know who did it.
Mm-hmm.
I used to hide my initials on things.
I was going to bring that up. That was another funny story you shared.
I used to hide my initials on sculpts. And it became a contest between me and one of the shop supervisors. If he could find my initials, then I would have to remove them. If he couldn't find them, then it was, I got tired of it after a while, because it got to be, because he got really good at finding my initials, and I started to get lazy. And eventually I just stopped doing it, because it was like, it got to be more trouble than it was worth.
Yeah.
And I did get yelled at once, because I was working on a figure for a sort of a mechanized dinosaur, and they suggested that I try and put some technical markings on it. So I was very industriously carving initials onto it. No initials, but I put my wife's birthday as a serial number, and the Japanese characters for Godzilla's name in Japanese, which unfortunately I didn't realize. I had not been told that the client was Japanese, and they saw those, and needless to say, somebody went through the roof. And the sales guy came back and said, let's cut back on this kind of stuff from now on, okay? And I said, okay, sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah.
We had to be careful about stuff like that.
I've heard some other stories of people sneaking in phone numbers or birthdays and things like that on decals on some toys, like especially the GI Joe vehicles. A lot of the random number decals on them happen to be numbers important to different people that worked on the brand. I've
been told that some of the early ones, the likenesses were actually modeled after the artists who were designing them.
Yeah, there's a bunch of figures that are based on different people that were important in the brand.
But I never got quite that blatant, but my initials did show up on very subtly on and I put my initials on old Toxie here. They were worked into the burn marks on his leg. Of course, they're completely impossible to see, because I did it. Initially I did them very small and very delicately, and of course after that was pantographed down to 1/2 its size, they disappear completely. But I know they're there, or they were there. I would. The last thing I put them on was a piece we did for the Franklin Mint. They had us doing a Star Trek related series of armors from the characters, and we did the Klingon, the movie version of the Klingon, a Cardassian, a Borg, a Jem'Hadar, a Romulan, and there was one other that I didn't do. And I snuck my initials onto the Klingon and onto the Borg. The Borg I got too blatant, and they caught me. And in fact, when the supervisor came out, he was laughing at me. He said, you can do better than this. And I said, okay, fine. Did you find them on the Klingon? No. Okay.
So you also told me you worked on just about every like cartoon character you can imagine, and you brought up Bugs with me. Who are some of the characters besides Bugs you did before we jump into him?
I did a lot of Disney characters. I did Goofy and Winnie the Pooh, and I never got to do Mickey Mouse, which is odd because I got to do.
You'd think he'd be the most merchandised guy.
He'd be the one. You'd think so, but I never actually got to work on Mickey Mouse. I got to work on most of the Looney Tunes characters, which was fine because I like the Looney Tunes characters far more than I like the Disney characters. The first time I got to do Bugs Bunny, he was this high, an inch high for something for Tycho. And I've got a cast of him at home that's all painted up. He was fun, and because of the pose they put him in, he was real easy because I didn't have to worry about undercuts or anything. So he turned out real well. I got to do. We worked on a Batman the Animated Series chess set, so I got to do the Joker and Batman. We did 4 characters from that. I got to work on 2 of them.
Okay.
One of the other sculptors got to do Catwoman. Damn it. That one was that was fun because we had at the time the head of our casting department was a lady from Vietnam, and we coaxed her into posing for the Catwoman. And they probably took a few more pictures than they really needed to, but because she was very attractive. But other characters, Superman, I got to do him once or twice. A lot of Pokemon. I think we did about a dozen Pokemon figures. And a lot of specific characters, like, as I said, we did the Street Sharks, and I don't remember what the series was called, but they were sort of super deformed dinosaurs. Most of them based on Tyrannosaurus Rex for some reason. They were all carnivores. I think there was one Triceratops-based character. And a lot of just generic figures, elves for, Christmas characters, and I got to do Santa Claus once. And as I said, Elvis Presley, and we did a couple of figures of Shaquille O'Neal.
Oh, really?
Shaq apparently had a pretty easy attitude about it. If it vaguely resembled him, he was fine with it. Danica Patrick came in once. We did a digital scan on her when we'd just gotten our digital scanner, which we were still learning how to use when the bottom fell out of everything.
Okay.
But she came through and handed out, was scanned and handed out autographed pictures to everybody. I, not being in sports, didn't know who the hell she was. They explained it to her later, and the thing that stood out to me was how short she was.
She's very petite.
She was like 5'2".
Yeah.
And I'm 6'2", so it's like, oh, But then again, being the size that I am, I often feel like I'm out of scale with the rest of the world. All of my wife's family are fairly short, so anytime where we're all together, there'd be everybody else and then me.
So, how would you tell us the story about Bugs? Like, what was he sculpted for? What was he made out of?
Bugs.
Is that the sculpt, or is that a?
This is a cast of the sculpt. The sculpt was done in wax over high density urethane foam, which was something that we got into. That came in. I guess about 8 years after I started. We started working with the high quality foam.
Was that to just save on the amount of wax?
It saved on wax.
Okay.
It saved on a lot of things because it was a good material to just do a rough sculpt with. In fact, later on we did some Nerf guns.
Oh, okay.
And we literally sculpted them out of this high density foam, and they were just for photograph, for commercial photos. So they didn't have to be real sharp and clean. They didn't have to be like what in movies are called hero props. They could be like background props. So we would just sculpt them out of this foam and just paint them up, and they look great. Well, if you didn't look too close, they had, of course, the downside is the stuff was like, as you sanded it and stuff, you were literally coated in what felt like had a bucket of sand dumped on you. But it was good. It was good material to work in, and it wasn't that expensive, and you could really work fast.
Okay.
Even faster than the wax. So Bugs was done over I did a rough core with the urethane, with the foam, and then built him up with wax. And they gave us a very specific description of his size, and they gave us his pose, and they explained the functions that the telephone was going to have. What they didn't describe was which version of Bugs Bunny they wanted. I got the job, and I said, well, which version of Bugs do they want? And they said they didn't say. And I said, okay, fine, I'll do the version of Bugs Bunny that I am the most familiar with, the one that I like, which is Bugs from the late 40s and early 50s, when he was, when he looked like this. And everybody liked him, and we did up a half a dozen copies of him.
He looks fantastic.
And sent it out, and it came back, and they said, it's great, but it's the wrong Bugs. I had done Bugs from the late, from approximately 1950. They wanted Bugs from Space Jam. Mm. So, and for some reason, they decided to let somebody else do the revisions. Usually they didn't do that. Usually, if one person started a job, it stayed with them from beginning to end. But occasionally, especially if you'd done something, if you'd made a hideous mistake, they would give it to somebody else. In fact, I ended up inheriting jobs, several jobs, because, not so much because they were, weren't very good. It's just that the time frame had gotten very short by the time it came back, and I was the fast guy.
Right.
So, I ended up finishing up a lot of jobs that needed to be done quick.
Gotcha.
But Bugs was my best example of doing it right and doing it wrong all at the same time.
It's very odd that they wouldn't specify that they want a certain era.
We were surprised. I guess maybe they figured that they just assumed that because Space Jam, I think this was when Space Jam had first come out or was about to come out. And I guess they assumed that we would figure, all right, they'll give us the most modern version of Bugs. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they didn't realize that the sculptor who was doing the job was a sort of a retrograde relic, sort of into the nostalgia thing. And but we there were, like, as I say, we did like half a dozen copies of them, and I think there were at least 3 of them that were on various desks, because we all tended to hang on to jobs that we liked.
That makes sense.
Castings of jobs that we liked. I have a couple of the Pokemon that I worked on. They were challenging because they had to fit inside the ball.
Oh, okay.
And they couldn't have any undercuts, and they're like this big, and they had to look like the character. Most of which did, though there was one that we could not get Pikachu.
Yeah.
Everybody in the shop, every one of the sculptors took a shot at Pikachu. And he was like Elvis Presley. We could not get it. We couldn't get Pikachu right.
It's definitely got to be hard to take a 2-dimensional character into 3D. And I've seen it in certain toy lines where you go, wow, it's odd to see it from every angle, and still have it look like a cartoon.
Sometimes, part of it is sometimes you're dealing with a character that quite literally changes appearance almost from frame to frame. Mm. There are some characters that work great in 2 dimensions, but you try to bring that, work in the 3rd dimension, and you just can't make it look like it's supposed to look. I'm working on a sculpt right now that the character, a lot of people recognize the character from a comic book that was done. In the comic book, this character's head literally changes shape from one frame to the next. It's like he has no skull.
Okay.
And fortunately, I'm not really that fond of that particular interpretation of the character anyway, so I'm not trying to copy it. For my own benefit, though, just to see if it could work, I tried.
Okay.
And I couldn't make it look anything like the drawing. So, I get it sort of looking like one frame, and then I'd look at another drawing and go, this is impossible. How, but, in a comic book or a cartoon, you can do that. Because, it's especially depending on how loose the character, the art style is on something like Ren and Stimpy or that show with the guy wearing the bunny hat. I don't even know the name of it.
Yeah.
Adventure Time, I think.
Oh, yeah, Adventure Time, right.
The drawing style is so loose that you can get away with, it can change from frame to frame and nobody bats an eye. But on the other hand, there's also characters that the animators do a pretty tight job from frame to frame, which are actually the jobs that are a lot easier to work with because you can take their drawings and say, okay, that's what it's supposed to look like.
The reference is real consistent.
Consistent. That's the word. Consistent references, consistent appearance over time are great when you're trying to adapt somebody's licensed character.
I brought some repaint stuff with me.
Now we get into the gist, into the fun stuff.
I wanted to see if you have seen something. Now, some of them I know you're aware of, but some of them maybe you're less aware
I
of.
imagine there'll be a surprise or two.
So this is a repaint of Slice.
Yeah, who's wearing a hat?
His little string.
Yeah, those were. When we got that guy, I was like, how are we going to do those? And they said they're going to take care of that. You don't have to worry about it.
So that was the second repaint of Slice.
In sherbet orange.
And then they released him again.
I know they did him in blue.
This was a color change figure. When you dip him in water, he changes to invisible mode. He kind of gets clear. So that was the Shadow Ninja version. And then on top of those 3 versions of Slice, they also used his body to make 2 versions of a video game character, Ryu from Street Fighter.
Oh, yeah.
And they sculpted a new head and stuck it on that same body.
And they took off his ninja stars, too.
Oh, yeah.
They're
on his wrist.
They're on his wrist.
Yeah, so they're still there.
Okay. Figuring that out was... how the devil am I going to make a ninja star on this guy?
And then he got a repaint again in the 2000s era. This time he doesn't even have his... Oh, he does still have his karate chop. I thought they removed it for the 2000s, but it's still in there. But this time
Mine doesn't do the karate chop at all. Mine has gotten this... Oh, yeah. Oh, he does still do it.
If you bring it down...
It's the only joint on him that still works. This guy... Mine is as floppy as they come.
Wow.
He just, which is why I don't even try and stand him up. And to make his arms lay at the side, you have to rotate it all the way back.
The Cobra Eel got a purple repaint.
Okay.
Very similar, actually. They just changed the blue to purple.
Yeah, it's not that different.
So they dropped his shark accessory, which was one of the cool features of that character.
I've still got my shark at home in my spare parts box.
Beachhead got a yellow vest.
Okay, well, it's a Mae West now. Classic Mae West. It's I don't know where his legs came from originally. I think it's
a figure called Muskrat they use in front, but they got to an era where they just started reusing the bottoms.
Well, yeah, after they'd been doing them like 7 or 8 years by then, so they had enough spare parts kicking around that they could probably put together, kit bash anything they wanted, really.
The Headman got reissued in the 2000s in a tan suit.
Well, it's not quite as glaring as black with gold pinstripes. It's a laser suit.
And then that suit actually got reused again. There's a pair of twins.
Oh, Lord.
That are members of Cobra. And in the cartoon, sometimes they appeared in business suits. And fans had always wanted them based on the cartoon appearance. And the only suit body in the whole line is the one you did. So they got used to that. There's also a General Flag figure. There's a character from the comic series that the aircraft carrier is named after from the GI Joe line.
Why not?
And they did this body in green, but I don't have that figure.
Wow.
With a new head. Your Cobra Bat got repainted in the 2000s in a black and yellow color scheme, which is the way the original bat was, and then a translucent red they called the Inferno BAT. And I actually made a custom version of the bat as a 12-inch figure. Yeah. There was a G.I. Joe custom website, and they did a contest one time, and they were trying to get people to make Joes not using Joe parts. And so I'm not really a sculptor, so all my stuff is like cardboard glued on a wooden mannequin and painted up, but that was my version of your bat.
Actually, that artist buck figure kind of resembles what the bucks they sent us looked like.
Okay.
They were just very slim limb segments, and then they would flare out at the joints because the joints all had to be identical, and by doing them as a hard copy machine piece. That way they could guarantee that the joints were always consistent, which meant that, among other things, that they could mix and match to their heart's content. And so we see that,
which was helpful throughout the line.
And you've got enough bits and pieces to do.
Another spot, like the Street Fighter Ryu figure, the Street Fighter Zangief figure uses the BAT's lower half. No real reason why this Russian wrestler would have robot legs, but he does.
Huh. Huh. Well, maybe he's a cyborg.
Maybe.
Makes as much sense as anything with GI Joes.
And then in the early 2000s, your Ice Cream Soldier got repainted twice. I only have the red version. There was a red version and a blue version, and they were bad guys, and he was called Shock Viper. And they're very popular, the repaints, because it's got it's a great sculpt, and now it finally has like a decent color scheme.
I was going to say, that's a much less glaring and much easier on the eyes than what they did with it originally.
The blue version is very popular of
it. Yeah, I bet it is. So,
just kind of fun that they, some of your stuff got extra life, extra use.
Yeah, well,
during the line.
As I said, one of the biggest kicks for me when I was still in the business, well, even today, if I go into a store and I see something that I worked on, originally when I first started out, I'd be like, "Hey, look at that! I did that." I get weird looks from parents like, "Why is this guy in a toy store and he has no kids?" Hey, this is my bread and butter, lady. But my wife would be amused by it. Saying, "Oh, okay, that's nice. Let's go." I got dragged out of more stores by my wife.
That's
but,
funny.
It's marriage.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This was
been fun.
Fantastic. I love getting to hear some of the inside information from a toy, the back end side of it.
It was about a third of my life that I was in on it, and it brought me a lot of fun and not a little amount of profit, and I wish I was still doing it. I really truly miss working in that kind of environment. What I'm doing now has nothing to do, no relation to it at all. There's no creativity involved in my current job, and I wouldn't go so far to say as I hate it, but I am aware of how long it is until I can retire. But on the other hand, if I could get another job in the model making and sculpting, I might put off retirement for a while, just because it was so much fun.
Well, you'll have to let us know if you end up getting in on some new toy lines down the road.
I don't know if it'll be toys.
Yeah.
I don't know any. Most of the shops that seem to be opening up are focusing more on medical technology.
Okay.
But we did it. And the fact is, RJ Studios was desperately trying to get into medical technology towards the end because it's very lucrative.
Mm.
And unlike toys, the people that are designing prostheses and such like that, they want to be able to inspect it in person.
Gotcha.
Without having to pay a couple of $1,000s to go to the shop over in the Czech Republic. They want to have it close at hand, and they want to be able to inspect it in person. So that might lead somewhere.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
It's been my pleasure.
And thanks for hanging on the peg with us, guys. We'll see you next time.
So long.
I have so many things I want to talk about. I'm going to get off track here.
This is the case of a game that was far more popular in Japan than it was in the United States.
They never went to Mordor. What are you talking about? This is kind of weird.
But there's real detail. There's like wiring underneath.
They're one and done. That's it. Sold out. So they're super hard to come by.
You heard him, guys. Bring it back. Here we go again. Round two.